So we've talked about aperture, we've talked about shutter speed, and we've talked about ISO. These three things make up what is known as the exposure triangle. By this point in the videos, you're probably like, Tanea, stop telling me technical stuff I don't understand. But it's important. If you want to learn how to maximize what you can get out of your camera, you kind of need to know this stuff. I went to university to be able to dilute this down into the most simplest form just for you guys who are watching. This one will be a short video today, but all I want to do is talk about how the three elements of the exposure triangle, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, work together to be able to create a properly exposed image. Now, how you work out what a properly exposed image is when the image looks balanced. So when your blacks aren't too crushed and when your whites aren't too blown out. The best way to work out if you have a properly exposed image is to use a histogram. A histogram is a tool that's built into a lot of professional cameras that shows the way that the colours are spread across your image. If it sits too far to either side, it means you've got either an underexposed or an overexposed image. The way to best use your histogram is to keep adjusting your three elements of the exposure triangle until you get a nice curve in the middle. You want the main point of the histogram to sit in the middle. Either side of the histogram should start down low and then come to a point in the middle, which means that it's properly exposed. A lot of cameras that I've used especially also use an orange or a yellow histogram that when the image is perfectly exposed, it'll turn white, signifying to you that you guys are good to go. Now, how you got to that point is you successfully balanced your exposure, your aperture, and your ISO within the lighting conditions that you have available. Now, your lighting conditions will constantly change. This is why I put so much emphasis on teaching you how each of the individual parts work, so that when you're in a situation that is changing or that your image is under or overexposed, you know which element of the triangle you have to change based on the current lighting situations. Now, if you're in a low light scenario and you've already got your ISO tapped, your main option is to open up your aperture wider. If you can't do that, then you can play with your shutter speed, but just be very careful with that to not drop below the 180-degree rule. You never want your shutter to be less than half of what your frame rate is. Otherwise, you'll start ending up with all kinds of blurry footage. And unfortunately, if you get to a point where there's still not enough available light to properly expose your image, you have one of two options. You invest in a nice light that you can cart around with you, and which will also add another level of awesomeness to your videos. Or you keep bumping your ISO, but then you do have to settle for a very grainy and crappy image, if I'm being honest. I had to do this when I shot for James Smith. The lighting was less than ideal. There was red lights everywhere. It was an event, so I couldn't just go put up a big aperture 120D light in the back corner. So my only option was to bump the ISO to like 3200 or 6400. And I just ended up with an image that looked like this. But since you guys have learnt so much from these videos so far, I'm hoping that you'll be able to stop yourself from being in the same situation I was. You'll know how all of these work. Make sure you pick up a light to bring along to shoots if you're preempt that there's gonna be a lack of usable light. And you know what, now that you know about the exposure triangle, exposing your image should be an absolute breeze. Thanks for tuning in for this little series. We've got a few more videos to come on camera technical stuff, and then we get into the juicy stuff. Learning Premiere Pro. See you guys tomorrow.